chess Olympiad has started in Batumi, Georgia, on the Black Sea coast, and it looks like a fabulous event. It's really colourful, teams from all over the world, but of course at the top it's really fiercely contested. There's the title holders, the USA. I think they, along with Russia, are the two favourites. But we know how strong Armenia are, and also Ukraine, and as maybe outsiders for the title, India are very strong this year as Anand is playing. So should be very, very tight at the top. Now in this first round, the big teams played the little teams, the big fish against the minnows, and I wanted to show you a game from one of those contests. So from the match between the USA against Panama, I think some of these games between very strong players and very weak players, often they're worth watching actually, because you can see the kind of tactics strong players use to unsettle a weaker opponent. It's really, you can learn a lot from them. And I've picked the game between Jorge Baules with white against Hikaru Nakamura. I think this was the board one battle actually, because Caruana was rested for this first match. So Baules has a rating of 23.58. Not such a bad player, but let's see what Hikaru does to someone even of that pretty reasonable strength. D4, and it's a very regular start, and Nakamura decides to play the Nimzo Indian. Bishop b4, of course, this can lead to double-edged positions, so that's a good choice. Queen c2, well, white wants to maybe just sort of keep a lid on things with Queen c2, and these variations are pretty well worked out. After d5 or c5 or castles kingside, these are the main moves. But here is where Hikaru starts to go his own way, or start to try to unsettle his opponent. Pawn to b6, and this used to be really frowned upon actually, because it invites white to occupy the centre. So white plays e4. I mean, this is the principal move. You should claim the centre if your opponent offers it. And now there was a very famous game that Nimzovich played in 1925, where he played bishop b7. Let me just show you this very quickly. He featured this in his famous My System, but he really had a terrible position with black. You can see that black is getting squashed here. The bishop is very poorly placed, and Nimzovich won a very nice game, but really white was very cooperative. At this point, white is doing extremely well. So not bishop b7 from Nakamura, but c5. Now he was playing these moves instantly. And you can see the clock times here that now white thought for almost 10 minutes over his next move. So he was already really thrown because he's not in his usual variations. And c5 is a really tricky move. Well, let's see what happens if that pawn is taken. Well, you could recapture with the b pawn, but bishop b7 is very nice, just putting some pressure here. Well, we might recapture soon, but we might, we might want to play knight c6 or something like this. But anyway, first of all, white has to deal with this threat, and if e5, then knight e4, and it starts to get very tricky. Interesting position. And the other very natural move after c5 is to just grab some space with d5. But then there's a very tricky move, queen e7, exploiting pins on the e-file. Thing is, if white ever exchanges here, then that'll leave room for the knight to hop into d4. So it's difficult for white to back down here. And this is certainly a more comfortable position for black to play than white, because white has difficulties simply developing in a kind of natural way here. It's not worse objectively, but it's tricky. Nakamura's opponent played e5, which is, I suppose, the other critical move in the position. What's black going to do about that knight? Well, first of all, take on d4. And if pawn takes knight, then this is simply very good for black. So there's a threat to take here. And if pawn takes pawn, then queen takes pawn, exploiting that pin. And black is obviously doing extremely well there, having won a pawn. So back to this position. But white had actually anticipated this. He played a3. Good move. And Nakamura doesn't mess about. He exchanges and knight g8. So this knight now has to move back. And pawn takes pawn. So, okay, let's take stock. White has this huge pawn centre. He also has two bishops. But it's black's move, and it's quite possible that these pawns will be overextended. They can be attacked pretty easily with d6, for example, but it's possible that this c-pawn could also be weak. Bishop e7 is very good because this simply creates difficulties for white on this diagonal, and white can't develop very naturally here. White actually played knight f3 here, but and that got taken. But if white wants to play, for example, queen c3 with the idea of knight f3, then white is falling behind in development. Something like this, and then knight f3. But I mean, this I think offers black pretty reasonable play against double pawns. You know, you've got rook c8 and knight a5 and pressure here. I mean, white should be okay as well, but it's a tricky position. Another continuation, what about bishop b2? Well, let's just develop. And yeah, I mean, maybe castles and d6 or rook c8 is coming and knight a5. It's not so simple for white. In any case, white played knight f3 here. And Nakamura seized his chance to damage the pawns like this. Now, one thing is, apart from the structural problems, that black gains time. So by that exchange, he's got an extra move, and he brings the knight out to attack the d-pawn. And white played a normal move, bishop b2, to defend it. I mean, a couple of things here. I mean, I wonder how useful is that bishop actually on the long diagonal? If it's going to come out anywhere, maybe better on e3. And the other thing is, maybe white should have been brave at this point and just flung the pawns forward just to kind of speed up his development. Give a pawn and get some play like this. So bishop b2 gains time, and if f6, then castles queenside. Now, this position is a complete mess, but black can't play in those kind of automatic moves that, you know, a strong player likes to do. Black has to think very carefully here because, you know, the lines are opening on the d file, on the diagonals here and here as well, and maybe this one comes out here, and don't forget the g file. I mean, obviously white's king is also, you know, a little bit exposed here. It's very, very complicated, but I just feel in this position, as is said with hindsight, of course, that white really needs to strike out and try to get the initiative very quickly here. In the game, bishop b2 was played, knight e7, rook g1, and here I don't see much wrong with just castling actually, but Nakamura played instead rook c8. Tricky move, very tricky. And I think, again, this shows Nakamura's style and the kind of contempt he holds weaker opponents in. Actually, I don't mean that in a rude way, actually, but he just wants to go for it completely, and he doesn't want to show them really much respect at all. And I think that's the best way of beating weaker players. Actually, play something sharp, and very often they back down. And here's a good case. Here's a case in point. So here, white removes the queen from the c file, away from the rook. But maybe d5 is the way to try to upset black here. If that's taken, then take on g7. Now that rook could be in trouble here. I mean, there are lots of moves. d4. Then you can take here. I mean, white, I mean, this is still tricky, but I think white should be okay. After d5, and perhaps a better move is knight a5. Allow white to take here, and then knight g6 to trap the rook. And, you know, there's pressure here. I have a feeling that's what Nakamura would have done. And then bring the queen out somewhere along here. But this is really not simple at all. There could be an exchange sack at some point. But instead, white played queen e4, which looks very active. But actually, at this point, after knight f5, then that just gives black such a solid position. The knight can't be easily shifted from there. Obviously, no pawn attack. And g7 is nice, firmly protected now. Bishop h3, attacking the knight, but that just gets protected. And also opens the c file for the rook. White's problem is the king, actually. If we could do a bit of Fischer random castling or some weird castling and get the king to h1 very quickly, then perhaps white would have a chance here. But black can open the position with moves like b5 and also d6 as well, a more orthodox break. And, well, dare I say it, the rooks are split and it doesn't help. Let's see what happens. d5. So white crashes on, but this is an excellent move. b5 undermines this pawn centre and also opens up this diagonal against the king. So if pawn takes pawn on b5, then simply knight d5. And queen a5 check is a deadly, deadly attack. If the king goes to f1, then we've got queen b5 check, forking these two. Well, there are other variations, but that's the killer move, queen a5. So white played pawn takes pawn on e6. A check. King steps away and pawn takes pawn. So white's centre has just collapsed after that exchange. And his coordination is terrible. So pawn takes pawn, then queen b5 check. Again, this double attack. So queen b7. That was after 25 minutes. I mean, basically white is bust by this stage. And Nakamura castled. So his rooks are connected. Yes, split rooks, that's the problem. And the king just can't get the other side quickly enough. As we're going to see. Rook d1, there's a very nice finish. Pawn takes pawn, so now black is even a pawn up. 2 pawns up. So this is obviously completely lost. That h pawn is under fire as well. So lots of ways to win. Queen takes h2 is very strong. But this is a great finish from Nakamura. Really nice. So if the rooks are exchanged, then, well, that black rook is going to come down here. White played rook takes knight. And now a very nice finish. Check. King has to step up. Knight check. King makes it to the corner, but that is a very efficient finish. If rook takes queen, rook takes rook, and mate. Fantastic stuff. I thought that was a superb lesson from Hikaru Nakamura on how to defeat a weaker player. So first of all, he selected a slightly offbeat variation, but he obviously knew it extremely well, tempted his opponent forward, and, well, basically one inaccuracy, or a couple of inaccuracies, and his opponent was lost. Great stuff. So the USA got off to a flying start, as did, well, all the big teams actually. There were, as far as I could see, there were no real upsets in this first round. I think all the big teams won. But I'm going to be doing reports throughout the tournament, so, well, do check into the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel, do check out patreon.com PowerPlayChess and help support us. There are now hundreds of videos on the channel, and there's a lot of great content. We're really proud of it. But it would be great if we had your support so that we can keep going and keep producing really great content for you. So let me know if you'd like to support us. You'll find the link up there somewhere. And let me know, who do you think is going to win? USA, Russia, or one of the others? Thanks for watching.